y'all tuned into the 585 Report with Atiana and Bishop. Catch us each and every Sunday from 6 to 7 p.m. on 100.9 WXIR, where we seek to elevate the conversation on Rochester, New York through go-getters from around the town. What's up, y'all?
What's good?
Bishop, wait. I was gonna say Bishop on time, but we started late, so Bishop is not on time.
I don't like to air my business out like that.
Okay, maybe.
That's in-house. That's between us.
All right, so Bishop was on time for the recording.
Boom.
How you doing today?
I'm doing good. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Can't complain. Nice weather,
I know I
finally.
should be out grilling, but instead I'm here recording.
I thought I was one of your favorite people.
You are.
Okay.
But I like food too, so it's like a give or take and thing,
All right. I know I can't compete with food, but I am super excited because we have like the busiest man in America in the building. Like, I tried to schedule an interview with him last week, but he got tied up, which is understandable with the work that he does. But I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background.
All right, cool. So I'm Dr. Leonard Brock, Executive Director for the Rochester Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative. Essentially, I work across public and private sectors to be able to bridge the gap as it relates to policy and practices that could reduce poverty in the Rochester area. So I work indirectly with the governor, city of Rochester, the county, and a host of other institutions like the United Way to bring resources and align leaders in a way that will allow for them to do the work necessary to help people in poverty. In addition to that, I'm a business owner, and I think I'm on here today to talk about Neighborhood Scholar, which is a company I founded, in 2014.
Okay. So, Neighborhood Scholar. Tell us how it came about.
Yeah, so Neighborhood Scholar, all my life I've been labeled everything that you could think about when you consider a young person growing up in public housing or projects, etc. So I've always been a very smart individual, but because of my tired vernacular lived experience, nobody expected me to do anything or half of what I'm doing today. So when I was younger, there was this whole thing of intelligent Doug and all these other, these different labels, and people didn't necessarily acknowledge, school being cool. And being that I was able to somewhat create my own lane, I wanted to be able to popularize scholarship or make it cool to be smart. So at the time, Trayvon Martin, his untimely death, and partly the reason that led to his death had to do with his clothing, his attire, and obviously a bigot that killed him because he speculated because he had on a hoodie, he must have been up to no good. And I can recall being in a similar situation where oftentimes my attire caused people to stereotype me or label me as something other than who I was as an individual. So I created the brand Neighborhood Scholar as a way to not only, acknowledge that we, you can find a scholar in every neighborhood dressed in any type of attire. The goal was to depersonalize the individual from their attire, and more importantly, be able to put down any myth or demystify the whole notion that if you don't look as if you are a nerd, if you don't look like you come from a different neighborhood or you come from a different environment or you don't come from a different setting, then obviously you don't belong. So we're just trying to create a lane for those individuals out there who still about that life, but ultimately being able to tap into their intellect as a way to level the playing field and do something besides playing ball or being an entertainer. Whatever.
Right, because I have a lot of students who that's all they want to do.
Right.
And they don't realize that it's so much more that they can accomplish. I guess, it is what it is. We need people like you to show them that there's more that they can accomplish.
Appreciate that.
So why do you think now more than ever that we need to promote scholarship?
I mean, as a viable means of doing anything, and obviously we have failing schools years ago, and they corrected this data point, but in Rochester in particularly, we recorded as having a 9% graduation rate amongst African American males.
Wait,
Like
Nine?
single or nine?
9% graduation rate amongst African American males. And this was the SHOT report that came out in 2012. And there was 11% amongst Hispanic males. They made some corrections, but ultimately we graduate the least number of African American Hispanic males like in the country.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So obviously, if you have a workforce that demands some level of skill acumen or degree qualifications, and if we're not graduating young brothers and sisters to be part of the workforce, we're doing not only a disservice to them but the entire community. So it's important for us to step up to the plate now, because people have to realize that I'm not a rarity. I'm a reality. There's so many Dr. Brocks in this community, but we just haven't taken the time to really cultivate that talent, because we don't look at scholarship as something that is part of our popular culture, and that's something that I'm trying to rectify, for lack of a better way of framing it.
How do we cultivate that talent?
Yeah, you really, individuals like myself, you don't have to give it a label. You can still do you, be you, and people have to acknowledge that, you can go to school. School pays. We know about the student loan debt, and mind you, I think that's the next big bubble. But to be quite frank with you, you don't have to get an education or engage in scholarship to work for no one. You can actually be a knowledge worker and have your own I was gonna say your own ish, but I don't want to,
No cursing.
Right, no cursing. You can have your own stuff, man. You can be a boss. You can boss up with an education.
Right.
And I don't know too many bosses who are illiterate, who don't apply knowledge on some level, shape, fashion, or form. So even though you may not necessarily take the route of academic achievement, you can't be a fool and expect to be a boss. So we have to figure out a way to redefine scholarship that make it appropriate for individuals to embrace it versus restricting it to education or school, So I think we just have to do a better job making it part of our social conditioning and popular culture. And that's partly the reason for Neighborhood Scholar.
So when you were younger, were you always thinking about college? Was it always at the forefront of your mind, or?
Nah, so I've always been smart, but I didn't think about going to college at all. Actually, it was a high school administrator that embarrassed me, that made me look at school as a viable way of living my life outside of the allowed me to look at post-secondary as an option. So he basically said I was lazy, I wasn't capable of producing or participating at that level. And he was asking all the students for college applications, and he didn't ask me, so I ain't like it. And I had this competitive edge, so, I was an athlete at the time, like, listen, you gotta be confused. So I ended up applying for a few schools and, made it happen. My mother had some issues at the time, so I ended up forging all the fast paperwork, figured it out myself. When I first went off to school, people thought I was on the run. People didn't even know I was actually at school. I went to the University of Buffalo. Mm-hmm. And I was very fortunate and thankful to get accepted, even though, things didn't work out the traditional way that they typically do. To make a long story short, I didn't necessarily adjust well, but I still, was very competitive and made it happen. And then by the time I transferred, because I got into a lot of trouble, socially I didn't adjust, academically I did fairly well after I was able to compete and look at students that were just light years ahead of me. And I actually, I know how to hustle, so I made it happen. Then transferred to Brockport, and I got, my high school, who was my high school girlfriend at that time. We were both graduated the same year. She had got pregnant with my son. Mm-hmm. And then it was my cousin. I had a family member, and to be quite frank with you, he was missing in 2000. We found him in 2001, slain. So at that point, it really made me look at college as a way out, even if it was temporarily, because, it was hot. The summer, that was a very, very intense summer. So it wasn't until then I actually looked at school as a viable alternative to the life and a lifestyle that I was engaged in when I was a teenager, still in school. So, but I didn't always aspire to go to college. I'm a first generation high school graduate. So obviously I didn't think about college. My mom would have been good with the high school diploma. Like, listen, son, I'm proud of you. Not because she didn't want more from me, but she came up from the South. She has like a 9th grade education. So I'm a first generation high school graduate, let alone being a college graduate, so it wasn't on the forefront of my mind.
That's what I was going to ask you. How did you stack up coming up into school with your peers, as far as your friends, the people that you hung with? Like, were you more focused than they were, or were you like just make do, these are my friends, this is who I'm around?
Nah, so ironically, you know, I engaged in a lot of different things. So my friends are my friends to this day, and they'll tell you, like, I've always been a leader. You know, I've never been a follower, and more importantly, you know, I always handled my business, but it wasn't that I made all the right choices. So I always tell people, because the question is always asked, you know, how did you make it and so many other people didn't? I have so many friends who end up doing 15 years, 16 years. Actually, many of them are home now. And if you were to ask them a question like, what was the difference between them and me? All I would tell you is I didn't get caught. So it wasn't that, you know, I was set apart from my friends, but I was always smart. I always applied my intellect, even in those situations where we were engaged in risky activity. I always was thoughtful. I think what separated me from many of my friends was the fact that I had a conscience. I was very calculated and methodical, so I wouldn't just do anything. Like, I'm not gonna fly off the hinges just off of GP. I'm gonna make sure I think about this stuff, you know what I mean? Because I ain't wanna go to jail and I ain't wanna get caught.
Yeah.
So for me, I use that strategy of growing up, you know, in the projects, and that strategy of engaging in those risky activities. And that's actually those leadership, those best practices or those lessons learned, I apply them to this very day in the professional setting. I just know how to cultivate, that talent very differently and transfer those skills. They're transferable skills.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, my friends are my friends. You know, they probably would say, they wouldn't say that I was just focused on school. Nobody saw this coming in a million years. Nobody thought that I was going to be a doctor or I was going to, nobody saw that. But they're not surprised by it either.
Yeah.
So when you decided to go get your doctorate, like, what were those conversations like? What were people thinking?
Yeah, it was crazy. So when I got my master's, people were saying I was doing too much. Like, you good, bro? Like, yo, you forgot the master's, man. Like, yeah, you fall back, man. You make the hood look good, man. We celebrate you. You know what I mean? You one of us, and you went and did your thing. But like I said, when I realized I could have more and do more, I was with it. What made me get my master's degree was that was around the same time that, the environment was intense. And I remember having a conversation with the director for the EOP program at Leonard Brock. Like, listen, if I graduate and go back home, there's a likelihood, man, I ain't gonna make it, man. I was really that fearful. And that senior year was even when I pledged a fraternity, because I was so adamant of changing my social surrounding and also my social network, that I was just afraid that it wasn't going to pan out in my favor if I were to go back home with a degree. So I actually started to panic a little bit. So he said, listen, I can get you a job as an EOP counselor if you were to enroll in grad school. And I had a friend of mine, Cambodian, I call her my Cambodian sister, so PSO. She was getting her master's in public administration. So I said, that's what I'm doing. She's doing it, that's what I'm going to do. And that turned out to be exactly what I wanted to do, and exactly what, God, instilled in me in terms of my purpose. But yeah, that conversation was crazy when I got my master's. Now, when I got my doctorate, it was because at the time I finished my master's. I was working as an EOP counselor, and I said, I want to be able to cultivate talent in the neighborhood. So I want to go back to the neighborhood and do my work, because I was working out in Brockport, and it was this guy, Rod Jones. He was from the projects in Brooklyn. He's not from Rochester, but he had a similar story to mine, and he hired me. And I said, all right, we're about to get busy. So I ended up working up the ranks, and he actually applied to get his doctorate degree. And I said, I must have applied with him and the HR director. I got denied, though. Mm-hmm. They told me I was too young. They basically said I had insufficient leadership experience, and like I told you, I was very competitive. What? Yeah, so I was 24 when I applied. I still. I graduated the youngest person from St. John Fisher with a doctorate at the time. So that I applied the next year. They told me I had to basically vacuum 2 years of leadership experience. I went back because, like I said, the president and the HR director were both in the program. I took on 2 departments, and basically they had to pay me. I said, listen, I'll take on both departments, and I knocked it out the park. Applied the next year unanimously. I got voted in because they said, you just do crazy.
Like, he really want in. Like, he's not gonna stop.
Exactly. So yeah, I was 25 when I actually enrolled in the doctorate program, and I actually defended my dissertation literally on my 28th birthday. Wow. So at that time, I was the youngest in the history of the school to obtain a doctorate.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it was wild at the time. Yeah, and just think about it. That was 10 years ago.
Wow.
I had my doctorate 10 years in August of this year. In August of this year, it'll be 10 years. It's crazy.
How does that make you feel?
Makes me feel like time doesn't wait for no man.
Right.
It seems like that's the thing. You know, every day I'm looking at a new gray hair, like, wow, man, like I want to slow it down a little right now.
All right, so all of this good work that you're doing and you're accomplishing, how are you going to get your message out to the younger folks, the younger generation, the kids that are coming up now?
I need the help of the community because I'm really I'm not special. I'm not that different from the young. Like I said, the only thing that separated me from many of my friends who end up doing serious time is the fact I didn't get caught. So the minute we can start looking at our young people, not as, you know, I was going to say cancer to society, the minute we can start to look at them and see potential, to see future scholars and be able to pour life into them, then we can start to change the narrative. We really need to redefine the narrative for our young people. So I'm going to do as much as I possibly can, and more importantly, I want to get some younger ambassadors. Like there's a friend of mine, Andre Johnson. He just finished his master's degree. He embraced that neighborhood scholar. My man Norman Simmons, you know, he's a young man doing his thing right now. And I know he embraced that neighborhood scholar. I almost want to say he got like hood scholar tattooed even on his chest. You know, so we from the neighborhood. We don't come from neighborhoods where scholarship was embraced. So, you know, we're project kids. You know, we East Side kids and you West Side. So, you know, we come from the pits of it. You know, I spent 23 years of my life living in public housing. So it's not like we grew up with silver spoons in our mouths. We're trying to make it happen. And the thing is, there's multiple Leonard Brocks. There's multiple Norman Simmons, Dre Johnsons, you know, Justin Morris, and there's a host of us, you know, even yourself, you know. So the goal is for us just to get the word out. I need as many people in the community doing that. We need ambassadors. We need people to lift the brand. It's not about me. It's not a business. It's not a t-shirt company or a hoodie company. It's not that. You know, we got 1,000,001 of those in Rochester. It's really a movement to get the message out to as many people as possible so they can actually be socially conditioned to see scholarship as the new best thing for them.
And how would someone go about joining the movement?
Listen, they join the movement by getting the apparel, neighborhoodscholar.com. And obviously there's going to be a significant number of speaking engagements, consulting. My first book initially was going to be called From the Block to the Boardroom, and I was going to talk about my transition and the trajectory that I took, but I'm going to label the first book Neighborhood Scholar. It's going to be like a memoir, so that's going to be an opportunity for me to get the word out there too. And I'm still looking for ways to create a stronger movement in ways that people can engage that's on the softer end of the spectrum. So we're not asking people to do much, but just promote. You know, as you know, repetition is everything. What you are immersed in and inundated with, that becomes reality. So this is about the social construction of reality. How do we construct the reality that scholarship is the new cool?
How would you say, how do we get the schools involved with this movement? Because clearly, we can do what we do out here in the streets, but we got to get the schools that these scholars are attending to get on board also.
Yeah, I like that. The scholars attending.
How do we pull in the school district? Because I remember you saying the low graduation rates and everything. How do we join forces with them to get them on board so they can start taking it as serious as we are?
Yeah, I think many teachers they rep the brand hard. Like Kim Brown, she's at school number 3. We have you know, the principal Stephanie. There's a few teachers and principals that really rock with it. You know, Alicia Thomas and others. So there are a lot of educators that really rock with the brand. They love the message. My man Corey, he's actually getting his doctorate from St. John Fisher now too. But we need the district officials to embrace this. This has to be something that the entire school district is able to lift as something that is a priority. And I'm working on it. You know, the problem is, you know, district leadership change every 2 and 3 years. The inconsistency is part of the problem.
Oh, we know.
Yeah.
Oh, do we know?
Every other year there's a new administration, and that's a problem. But, you know, we can't, you know, young people and family, they have to make this mandatory. You know, this shouldn't be optional. You know, their well-being shouldn't be left at the hands of those individuals who may not identify with their story, their narrative. So the more we can actually, you know, like I said, inundate the community and make the school district, which is a byproduct, they have to service the community, you know, then hopefully they'll be able to look at this as something that they should do a much better job endorsing.
I know you were talking a little bit off air about what's next for Neighborhood Scholar. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Speak to that.
Yeah. So in the future, we're looking to do a significant, amount of consulting. So working with school districts and colleges or educational institutions, municipalities across the country, to create a movement that is not just permeating Rochester, but really being able to spread throughout the U.S. I've been able and blessed to do some work throughout the East Coast, and there's hoodies right now being sold in 7 different markets. So that's a good look. And with my son going to school in North Carolina A&T, and he's going to major in business. And actually, I initially founded the company with him. So this is going to be a platform for him to do his thing as well. So obviously the consulting, the publishing, the first book is going to be Neighborhood Scholar. And then we want to continue with the merchandising. We want to get as much apparel out there as possible. So hoodies, t-shirts, hats. We want people wearing the apparel. We want people asking the question, because the logo is very catchy. So people, every time I wear the logo, or any one of my contemporaries who's wearing the logo, people ask the question, what is that? I like that. So no matter where we are, so I was even in North Carolina a few months ago, and a few of my bros was wearing the t-shirt, and everywhere they went, people were stopping them, asking them where to get the t-shirt from and what it's about, and then the message speak for itself,
I think I definitely gotta get a Neighborhood Scholar.
Should have been had one.
I know.
This is actually my first time hearing about it.
Yeah.
I know I'm in and out the city, but this is really my first time hearing about it.
Well, now that you know, you need to have your Neighborhood Scholar.
Oh, that's a fact. I'm definitely gonna get on the way, get on the brand, and start supporting, doing my part as far as community service. What upcoming events in the community wise we have coming up?
Yeah, so right now we really don't have any Neighborhood Scholar sanctioned events, but we're going to be at Juneteenth and different events like that with the apparel. We're going to have tables. Last year or the year prior, I had a table at the TV tournament, so we may do that again. I'm going to talk to my man Eddie, and that was a platform that we were able to use to kind of get the word out about Neighborhood Scholar. And we sold out both days that we were there. People just, they embraced it, they respected it. And then individuals who know my story, so the authenticity behind the message is there too. So you have individuals who respect the brand because they respect the person who created the brand. So that goes a long way as well, just being able to relate to that story.
And how does promoting scholarship align with the work that you're currently doing?
Yeah, so the two are separate, but as education is an economic equalizer, all these people say. I don't necessarily subscribe to get a good education, you get a good job, and you live a good life. I think that's BS for a couple of reasons. You do have people who have a good education, who have a job, and still live in poverty. So I ain't gonna say it's the way out of poverty, but it certainly is an opportunity to improve your likelihood of not having to live in poverty. So obviously, education and poverty go hand in glove. The chicken and egg conversation all the time. You can't look at education in the absence of poverty or socioeconomic status. You can't look at poverty without thinking about the educational outcomes associated with individuals who are experiencing poverty. So it goes hand in glove. There's no way of really disaggregating the two. But as far as my work is concerned, I keep the two completely separate though.
Okay. So thank you for tuning in to 100.9 WXIR. You're tuned into the 585 Report with Atiana and Bishop. We are on 6 to 7 every Sunday. If you are just tuning in, we have Dr. Leonard Brock in the building, and we're discussing Neighborhood Scholar and some of what's going on in our community and how Neighborhood Scholar could really help individuals who may not necessarily have education at the forefront of their mind, but once they hear the message, it may guide them in the direction towards continuing education. So as far as the work that you do, what made you go into this line of work?
You know what? So I always wanted to service the community in which I grew up. So what led to me leaving Brockport to work in the community was the simple fact that I wanted to cultivate, create more individuals like me who may not have mentors or people to advise and counsel them. And there weren't too many examples. So I always wanted to do this work, and then watching my mom struggle when I was younger and really have to deal with the pitfalls related to poverty was something that angered me. So what led to many of my risky decisions when I was younger wasn't because I just, was this greedy individual that just didn't necessarily care about the world and was out for myself. It was really trying to improve the quality of life of my mom. So watching her struggle really bothered me on so many different fronts. So it really was inspired by her. And I worked in various different fields. Like, people really don't even know what I do professionally because I worked in education, I worked in education reform, I worked in human services, I worked in higher education, and this work around poverty reduction. Like I said, it's a public-private partnership or a coalition of different institutional leaders. So I was appointed. So at the time in 2015, this thing already happened. The governor, I said the government, but yeah, it wasn't government. The governor had basically said we need to do something big and bold to address poverty in Rochester because at the time there was nonprofits that were trying to scale up a program. He's like, listen, programs aren't going to cut it. And there was a few reports that came out of Rochester. And I guess there was already individuals who, the way this community worked, it's all about association. They had people who they wanted to be part of the network, and I think they already had somebody earmarked for my job. The mayor said, listen, if y'all don't hire an authentic leader, I'm out of here. And there's an article about it because she threatened to say, listen, if y'all gonna hire somebody who don't know anything about poverty to people, she's gonna pull away from it. She don't want no parts of it. So to make a long story short, without getting into the politics, I was the person who, had the degree qualifications, all the credentials, and represented, the community in such a way that, the mayor was able to embrace. Because, clearly she knows my story. I knew her prior to her being the mayor and she was on city council, and we go back quite some time. So I didn't want to be the director. Mm-hmm. I actually pushed back because I was the executive director for Rock the Future Education Reform. And I felt I was set up to fail because I was one person responsible for a plethora of responsibilities, and I wasn't with it. Because with these public-private partnerships, it's a new wave of leadership, and people are not accustomed to it, so they don't understand how much work it takes. So going through the experience of Rock the Future, and I did that for a few years, I wasn't with it. I said I do the deputy director, but I'm not really trying to be the director because I understand how these things work, or at least I thought I did. So she hit me up like, listen, that's a disservice to the community. Like, yo.
And she's absolutely right. She's absolutely right.
Yeah, so she hit me up, and I, and basically, and she was a woman of her word. She promised me that she'd support me, and I won't be in the same predicament that I was in prior, and it worked itself out. I only had one staff person for a few years, though.
Wow.
Yeah, but now I got a team, and they're dope too. They doing their thing, so I have a team of 7, so we're getting busy out here right now.
So I can understand why you said you didn't want to be the director, especially with the initiative like this big, and then you hear other news reports like this amount of money, and then people are like, what is Brock doing?
Right.
As if the whole initiative is just you.
Right.
Like it's just not other people connected to you. So I understand, however, just like the mayor said, it's a disservice because you've been in a situation where poverty was your reality,
right.
And now you're Dr. Leonard Brock.
Right. I appreciate that. Yeah, a lot of people, this job, it's a big role that comes with a lot of responsibility and criticism. There was a false narrative in the beginning. People assume I had $100 million. That was the narrative back in the day.
Like you had it in your pocket?
Yeah. So peep this. You know how it's crazy to think about this, right? How funny that is. I'm dead serious.
No, I saw the news stories,
Yeah.
like when you know how those news stories go, and then people have all their comments on, I saw it, and I was just like,
Yeah.
So they just thought you just popped up with $100
you
million.
think $100 million because the region received $500 million, $500 million, very similar to the Buffalo billion. $100 million was allocated as part of the Regional Economic Development Council to support poverty-related efforts. Obviously, the work that we're doing in our MAPI was going to receive support, but none of that money was managed by me. But because it's poverty and it's money and it's $100 million, and I'm so-called a poverty man, everyone just associated that I was responsible for the $100 million. And even to this day, and that's part of the reason why I'm moving hard with the Neighborhood Scholar, because the label of being a poverty man is demobilizing in many ways because one person is not responsible for poverty, but people literally, like you said, I don't even read the comments. When I tell you,
I say because it's you, and I know it's you that's over it. So normally I don't read the comments because people are so racist and they're so negative, and they can be just so nasty. But I was just like,
they've been going hard for the last several years, and people still to this very day, I'm still asked the question, what are y'all doing with all that money?
Like they probably could see you on the street and be like, "Hey, Leonard, can I talk to you for a moment?"
Right. Like, yo, listen, I need help. And then when you can't do it, and they just assume, because they read an article and they speculate that you have resources that you don't, and you don't come through. They just assume that you don't want to, or you trying to be funny with the money. I'm like, man, listen, it's crazy, guys.
So in other words, they think that the $100 million in your account, and you got to divvy it out the way you want to.
Right, they think I'm sitting on some bread right now. You know what's wild though? The narrative, like even like I had a BMW.
Oh yeah.
Like before I was with the initiative, I had put like this. Everything I ever had, I had it before I was with the initiative. Once I was appointed or hired to serve as the director for Art Mappy, I pretty much had to give up all that stuff because people just didn't. It was wild. So everything I had prior to being with the initiative, people just speculated that, oh, that's where the money is going.
Right.
Even vacations. I went on a vacation. I remember a leader in our community hit me up, somewhat, to criticize me for putting on Facebook, celebrating the anniversary. So we went out the country, which is something I've done for 10 years straight.
And you're not supposed to live your life even though you're
exactly.
What? People are crazy.
Anti-poverty. That's the whole point of being a success story. So you're not.
So that's one of the negatives that come with that label, with poverty being the first word. Like,
that's right.
This is how you're still supposed to be living for some reason.
All right, it's foolish.
Why do you people feel like since poverty is the first word they see, that since you're the director, you should be directly affected by it to this day still?
Right. It's because some people don't see us as anything other than being people who experience poverty. There's two things. There's ascribed status, like, you born in it, and then there's achieved status. The minute you have achieved status that goes beyond being in poverty, it makes people uncomfortable. That's their narrative of us, oftentimes, and even of ourselves, is not that we should be living comfortably. If we see someone living comfortably, irrespective of the reason why, especially if it's legitimate, it comes with a host of different, it comes with I'm just gonna say a different level of response. And it's unfortunate. And
we know that response.
Yeah. and the same thing with, our counterparts, right? They may see it and be like, okay, we got a little token over here. And
token.
And they'll try to tokenize you, and they'll try to control you. And that's not, listen, we don't, listen,
How did you navigate around that? Like, cause I've seen it in so many cities, especially working for Wegmans, when I worked for Wegmans, because there wasn't a lot of us in management, but when you were, they tried to make you the token.
Yeah, I'm an unapologetic black man, and I'm not apologizing for my lived experience, nor am I apologizing for the work I'm trying to do to liberate the community and our people as a whole, right? So I use facts. Obviously I'm opinionated. I have an opinion about anything, but I use information, I use data, I use facts. I'm trained as a social scientist. So I'm able to mitigate many arguments by just presenting the facts. For example, there's 3 guiding principles related to the work that I'm doing. And this is when it's splintered. People, and I'm gonna shut down. We said there's 3 root causes, or 3 things associated with poverty that if we don't address, we're not gonna be able to move the needle. Structural racism, trauma, and community building. When the conversation on structural racism came up, it split this community in half. You had people actually leaving and storming out of meetings, and people were threatening that if we keep that as one of the guiding principles, that they're going to walk away from the initiative. And this is the very community that's responsible for creating some of this work that we're trying to overcome.
It's crazy that they don't want to have those conversations. Like, if we can't have those conversations, how are we going to move forward?
Yeah, exactly. And the question becomes, are we really trying to move forward, or are we just trying to make it appear? It becomes more symbolism than anything. And that's the thing. I'm not in this role for symbolic reasons. Like, if I were to be that token Negro that took the good job and said, I'm going to keep it pushing, man, I would have been, I would have been the happy, what do you call it, the happy magical Negro walking around here just cheesing like, yeah, I got a good job. That's corny, So, and then that's the good thing with having your own resources prior to a job like this, because you're not dependent on anyone for anything. I got my own, personal agency. So, oftentimes they dangle that money in front of you, and they basically, that's a way, just for individuals to control you in your narrative, because they figure if they're paying you, then they control you. And it doesn't work like that for me, and it's never going to work like that. And the good thing is I have a community that supports that, and the mayor who supports that. So there's people who really, really, really rock with me, and not just black people either. I got a lot of people, a lot of allies that rock with me too, and that's what they expect from me. The good thing is, because of the lived experience, people expect me to be this type of leader. Mm-hmm. In the absence of being this type of leader, I wouldn't be who I am. So even though it makes a lot of people uncomfortable and creates some discomfort, there's an expectation. Well, that's just, Brock gonna give it to you, how you gonna give it up, so.
Mm-hmm. So when talking about poverty, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about people that are in poverty. Mm-hmm. What do you feel like some of those misconceptions are? Yeah,
it's a lot of misconceptions. I think, like I said, we talked about a social construction of reality as it relates to scholarship, but poverty is a construct as well. We talk about poverty and we say it's a bunch of black single female heads of households having kids out of wedlock and a bunch of brothers who want to take care of their responsibility. That's the narrative. We say it's a bunch of black people who are on welfare and Hispanic people who are on welfare and they're lazy and all that. But that's why I say I use data. When you look at the data, and let's just use the label working poor. These are people who are working part-time, full-time, part-year, looking for employment. Half don't have children. Wow. And guess what? A quarter, so 25% have a post-secondary credential. And guess what? Many of those individuals are in the workforce. So if in fact you don't have a child, you're educated, you have a post-secondary credential, you're working, and you're still living in poverty, who's at fault? It becomes a systemic challenge. And by us personalizing it or making it the individual's responsibility, I think that's always been something that plagued our community and will continue to plague our community unless we understand that it's policies and institutional practices that created poverty. And it's going to take policies and institutional practices that's going to be able to remove the barriers to poverty.
Do you think it's too many moving pieces? Well, let me rephrase that. It's so many moving pieces that's like, when you move this piece out the way, you got three behind it.
That's right.
So do you think that's one of the major reasons that we hear about all this change taking place, but nobody sees it because they don't see behind those other three moving pieces that hasn't went anywhere yet?
Right. Yeah, it's hard. So you're right. It's very complicated. It's very confusing too. And there's so many different layers. There are so many different parts. So absolutely, I think it's very difficult. And if you are in survival mode, you're not trying to think 10 steps. You're trying to think 10 seconds. You know what I mean? Right. So you're not thinking, strategically about the future when you are in crisis mode. So it's very hard to get out of that rut. When you got some real urgent, immediate crises in front of you that you're trying to handle and deal with, and the amount of stress that you have to endure makes it impossible. It impairs your judgment and your ability in which to do it. And I think some of that is intentional. I'm not going to say all of it. This is not about the man creating this. It's not that at all. But when we look historically, at poverty, and we look at, again, like I said, those policies and institutional practices, and it's confusing. You look at the GI Bill. The GI Bill was responsible for a lot of veterans leaving the war and being able to leverage zero interest loans. Those loans led to a significant number of people who are white, primarily, being homeowners. And then guess what? You build equity. So like even in Monroe County, 98% of people who were able to take advantage of the GI Bill across the country were white. Not a single person in Monroe County was able to get one at that time. So then think about the income gap. So then you look at that. So then, you got housing, you got income, you got education, you got poor health, and all these work hand in glove. So if I'm a person who is living in the midst of these public policies, because housing is a public policy, health is a public policy, education is a public policy, I'm in the middle of all these public policies that's working not in my favor. It makes it very difficult for me. And they say, pull your boots up by their bootstrap. I don't have a pair of boots. I don't even, there's not even a bookstore nowhere nearby. What you expect from these people? And that's the thing that, just, it's crazy. And like I said, the media and the narrative that's created, that social conditioning, or many people refer to it as social engineering, that's real. We see it played out time in and time out. That's the reason why you have all these images of people of color, black males in particular, being viewed as angry, violent. That's stemmed from the turn of the 20th century, and even after the abolitionist movement in the after the 1865, when we've been villainized. Like, you got us being viewed as not only angry and aggressive, but just dangerous. We gotta protect America against these beasts. And then look at current day, we're getting slain in the streets, and it's the same image.
It's crazy because they don't even try to hide it no more. Like, it's plain as day. Like, they used to put out press statements when they see something about a black man. Nowadays it's just, well, we gonna run it regardless, and y'all, this is what y'all gonna see.
You know why they have to? Because we work in a day and age where information is immediate. Just like we're recording this interview right now live, and they could be viewers watching it right now. And that's not the case, but we're working in the social media era. So if the news media don't get the story out, the story's going to leak out. So they want to put their spin and their narrative on it before the masses get a chance to kind of dissect it and do what they want to do with it. So you got that. And also what we had in the past, which we don't have now, there are no consequences. So we're not a united, organized group of individuals anymore. So when things happen, we respond with anger, but there's no organized effort to counteract it. So think about it. What are the consequences? How many black
Fake
men?
outrage.
Right. How many black men are going to get slayed before we start to realize, that's just what happens?
I think it's just people, like you said, there are no consequences. We get fake outrage. We write about it on social media for maybe a week, and then it's on to the next topic.
People get upset at me because my views are different on a lot of things. Like, I've been fortunate enough to live around the world and see different cultures and see people die face to face. I've had friends die in war and everything. So I look at stuff a little bit different than other people, and I'm educated, so that's a plus even more. But when something happens, I look at it outside the box, and the first thing people tell me is I'm anti-black. Like, I'm anti-black because I see the whole picture. Like, they look at me like, you're not black enough because you want to take this person's side. I'm not taking nobody's side. I'm going by what I see. That's all we can do these days, is go by what we see. And for some reason, people don't want to accept that, and it becomes a trend. They just want to post this and post that because it's a trend, because everybody else is posting.
See, this is the thing, and the threat of basing an assumption off of what you see. The question becomes, what do they want you to see?
Yeah.
So that's how the narrative sometimes is created or drafted, is that the narrative doesn't necessarily, it's not a complete narrative. And there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. But we know media and propaganda has been used for a long time to manipulate, the culture. And it's going to continue in that fashion until we figure out how to do for ourselves. So, you can't look to dominant systems and structures and expect anything different than what you're getting. And until we as a community come together, on a unified front, to be honest with you, you could expect some of that. And that's not to say that we need to accept it, because if you tolerate anything, you accept it. And if you accept it, eventually it becomes a social norm. If it becomes a social norm, then you become desensitized to it. And we don't want that to ever be the case. We have to disrupt it, but we also have to understand and acknowledge that we have to be creators and doers for ourselves.
Do you feel that Rochester is on that verge of becoming the social norm? Like, our poverty, this is just how we live.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Because you hear people say it all the time, well, this is Rochester, Rochester this, Rochester that, but it's Rochester, so
So,
oh well.
Right. So to that point, we have like, okay, poverty. We have people who have been in poverty, their families have been in poverty, and their families have been in poverty, and so on and so forth. And it becomes like a mindset. And so, how do we get to changing that mindset? Or do you think like poverty is just going to be something that is going to be accepted? Because like, I remember back in the day, when you had food stamps, like you were embarrassed. Like it wasn't a thing that you like talked about.
Right.
But now it's like the norm, and students will be like, "Well, how much you get a month?" And then I had a student be like, "Miss, can I buy some food stamps from you?" And I'm like, "I don't get food stamps." So they kind of think like that's their norm.
It's right. Like I said, if it's again, once it's tolerated, it becomes accepted. Once it becomes accepted, it becomes a social norm. So yes, you're right. So there's two things to respond directly to that. Will it become the norm? Unfortunately, it is the norm, and that's the point. We need to disrupt it. Two is that it's only the norm for individuals who subscribe to it. We have to redefine even poverty, right? So in Rochester, the city of Rochester, there are 67% of the population. 67% of the population is not self-sufficient. So if you ask me, they're living in poverty, right?
Wait, 67%.
So 33% is the label they give. And if a person is living in poverty, mind you, the formula is from like the early 1960s. And that was from think about it, it's a formula from the 1960s. It doesn't account for the cost of inflation or anything else. So if you have to support a family of 4 or 20, let's just say $25,000, it's impossible, right? But that's the formula we're working with right now. To be self-sufficient, to support a family of 4, you need close to like $80,000.
Seriously.
So 67% of the population is not self-sufficient. Only a third of the population in the city of Rochester is considered self-sufficient, meaning by different quality of life indicators. If that's the case, right, you got 67% of the population that's economically insecure. We're thinking about poverty as the individuals who are chronic. So they are in crisis. These are not just individuals who are in poverty, they are in crisis. And if you look to just focus solely on individuals who are in crisis, you're going to get those marginal levels of performance as it relates to outcomes. You take anything, you take any, because again, we're talking about chronic issues and crisis. We're doing nothing to support the individuals who are straddling the fence. And there's a thing like the benefits cliff, and how are we helping individuals that's showing the wherewithal and the fortitude to improve their lot in life? We need to do more in that space. There's more people who actually want to do what's necessary to move themselves out of poverty than who want to just say, you know what, I give up. I'm gonna take advantage of these public supports. That's my life, and that's what it is. I always say something that's not popular. People, really criticize me for this, but again, it is what it is. I'm not in the business of forcing people. I'm in the business of helping people who want to help themselves. And it's simple as that. So, I'm going to do my best to help everyone, but the minute a person resists, there's not much I can do. I'm not saying there's not much anyone else could do, because there are some other issues there, but that's not my line of work. Okay. So, I'm going to try to create all the opportunities in the world to support individuals, because there are more individuals that they're not part of these equations. So when you think we don't even capture data for them. So we go from poverty to self-sufficiency, and we don't even have data. There's no data for half the population or a third of the population who are not in poverty, who are not self-sufficient. We don't even capture data. But if you're going to have a real impact, you need to figure out a way to support them.
So how do we get that formula changed?
That's public policy. That's public policy, and we need to fight for it. Since it's they're going to actually capture more information and data. And the city of Rochester has this push coming out, which is really good. But I think we have to push for the formulas to be changed. And this is something interesting, and people don't know this. So from like 1964 to let's just say the early 1970s, guess what happened to poverty in the United States? Poverty went down. So the New Deal and so-called the war on poverty, it worked, but it wasn't going to be sustained. It was public policies. So if it worked, you will sustain something that worked, right? So I ask the question, why didn't we sustain it? because it never was intended for us to eradicate or really reduce poverty. America is predicated on having a permanent underclass. That's the reason for mass incarceration. That's the reason for the social inequities that we experience today. It's predicated, it's interwoven into even our Constitution. So like we watch documentaries like 13th, it's an amendment, meaning it's an amendment that wasn't part of the original document, right? So there's real law in place, or that has always been in place from our forefathers to keep, a permanent underclass, because that's the only way that American, society was able to function and flourish. I'm pretty sure, if you never heard this, it's not my quote, but it said America was a corporation before it was a country.
Absolutely.
And I believe America always been I think it's always
Still
been a
is.
corporation. Yeah.
It still is a corporation.
Right.
So if you're just tuning in, we are talking to Dr. Leonard Brock on 100.9 WXIR, the 585 report with Atiana and Bishop. And we started out talking about neighborhood scholar, and we moved on to some of the work that Brock is doing with our MAPI. So my question to you right now is, why do you think people are so critical of the work that you're doing?
Because they don't understand it. And it's easy to criticize something that you don't understand. It's also easy to place blame for something that you don't necessarily know how to resolve. Rochester has done that for a long time, right? There's always got to be like a fall guy or somebody who's responsible.
The fall guy.
Yeah, there got to be a fall guy, someone who's responsible. But it's not going to happen. Right. It's just not going to happen. So, the criticism comes with the role, and I expected. At this point, I got really thick skin. When I first took on the assignment, I didn't realize it was going to be as intense. I didn't realize it was going to be as visceral. In the racist comments, really still are unsettling to me. And speaking of racist comments, let me tell you what goes on with this territory, and I'll let you draw your own speculation, right? So Thursday, I actually attended my son's award ceremony at Greece Athena. I'm gonna be this because again, I got there 7 o'clock. I leave around like 8:45. Once I leave at 8:45, I realized that my car was keyed. The whole side of my car was keyed. I go in next to the principal, like, yo, listen, somebody keyed my car. Do y'all have cameras? He said no, etc. Make a long story short. My son goes to school the next day. He has the 2 black security guards. If there's cameras, they say, yeah, we got cameras that cover the back of the parking lot. So they go to review the camera. Guess what? There's a security guard, ex-cop, that's keying my car. So then you ask yourself, what's the motive? Yeah, this is a lie. This is like what I'm doing right now. So I'm still,
What did you do to make
what did I do, or what do I represent? That's
right.
the thing.
That's ridiculous.
So that speaks. So mind you, many could speculate, because again, here you got a young brother in a suit walking out of a nice car going into a school building. Obviously that could, it could be a host of different reasons. The motivation, is it racially charged? I believe so. Many other people believe so, even some of the security guards, but that's neither here nor there. But the reality is this: I walked outside, my car is keyed up by a school security guard who was an ex-cop, who I had no relationship with.
It's crazy.
So as we talk about criticism, some of it comes from just sheer hatred, for the work I'm doing and what I represent and the message I'm trying to convey. Some of it comes from jealous individuals who feel like, they should have the opportunity. Some of it comes from people who don't understand and know the work, and they feel like I have a whole bunch of money and I'm not making wise decisions. It comes from a host of different reasons. But oftentimes people just don't understand. And that's where you find, so much criticism. And then people don't publicize praise. So the amount of praise, I get more praise and I have more support. For example, for every critique, I probably have 3 times as much praise. The praise is not going to be in the media. The praise is not what you're going to find on social media, right?
Right, because when I looked up our MAPI, it was always what wasn't going as planned, right, or what, it wasn't anything positive.
Right.
And I know for sure that there are some positive outcomes, right, with the initiative, but of course, like you said, the media doesn't highlight that.
That's right. And this thing, the one article that was really good was the Rochester Business Journal. The most recent, they actually got it right. And WXXI tried to get it right too. They did a series, and even Channel 8. So now the media's starting to come around. But the DNC was
the DNC is the article that came out.
The DNC is largely responsible for that narrative. And even though I like one of the reporters in particular, she and I are good peoples, but most of the staff, they are no longer even there. But the DNC is largely responsible for the public narrative that was negative around our mapping.
So, I know that it's probably been a long few years, and it's going to be a long road. Is it a grant funded position, or is it?
Yeah, it was. So we diversified the funding. So initially, New York State obviously contributes generously towards the effort, but ESL and other local foundations are supporting the work. So we've done a good job diversifying funding. You don't want to have just one organization that's responsible, because if the organization or entity or municipality decides to go in a different direction, and there goes the effort.
That's what happened in Hillside.
Right, exactly. So I'm wise enough from my experience in human services and working in for other organizations. I know that was one of the initial goals, was to diversify funding, and we did that.
Okay.
So we're around for at least another 5 years. We got 5 years of funding, and that's from a fundraising perspective. Being an executive director for a nonprofit, because it's considered a nonprofit, even though it's a public-private partnership. Being able to secure funding for 5 years is really it's not an easy feat.
What about those more seasoned leaders that are involved in the effort, who haven't been real receptive or embraced some of the things that are moving forward? How do you handle?
I think most of them understand. I think I was even forewarned. Many of the seasoned leaders, they actually support me publicly and privately, because they're not necessarily critical of me as much as they're critical of the system.
Okay.
And some of the institutional actors, because they don't have any trust in some of them. Because think about it like this. We talk about failed efforts and initiatives as if they were not governed by people. So take, for example, the Children's Zone. We talk about the Children's Zone if it was a failed effort, but we failed the effort. There were people involved in that, the same leaders, some of them, many of them around our mapping table. So we talk about it as if it's this own separate thing. So we have a tendency of placing the blame in this community, and it's unfortunate, but the reality is, we're working to mitigate some of that. But many of the seasoned leaders, they support the work that's happening.
Okay. Do you ever think that we're going to eradicate poverty in Rochester, New York?
We're never going to eradicate poverty. We can reduce poverty. Ideally, aspirationally, yes, I want nobody to have to experience poverty. Can we reduce poverty? Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely, unequivocally, without a doubt, I believe we can do it, and I believe we're going to. Are we going to eradicate and eliminate poverty? I don't. And again, I'm transparent. No.
Okay. Well, we are at our time. This has been such a good conversation. I feel like I need to open a book right now.
I have it back.
Y'all got me in raw form right now. Y'all got me in raw form.
You and Natalie Shepard came in here and were yourselves, and I appreciate that. Not saying anybody else wasn't themselves, but sometimes when you're a public eye, you can't be yourself, and you can't tell the truth, and you can't be authentic. But I appreciate you guys for doing that, because it was definitely dope. It's good to have your input and to see things from your lens. Tell people where they can find you at quickly.
Yeah, they can find me. If anything, check out Neighborhood Scholar, neighborhoodscholar.com. That's the website. You can purchase merchandise from the website. You can learn more about the movement. I'm also, you can find me on IG, Neighborhood Scholar, or Facebook, Leonard Brock, and then Brock06 on IG. So those are the only two mediums I use right now as far as social media. And then if you pull up anything on Google, you can find a whole bunch of stuff. Just don't believe any of it.
All right, you have been tuned into the 5-Day 5 Report with Atiana and Bishop. Catch us next Sunday from 6 to 7 p.m. We are out.
All right.